Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. The shimmering vessel of the Korani hovered silently in the upper atmosphere of Earth, cloaked in an invisibility shield that made it nothing more than a ripple in the sky. Rosen, the lead archaeologist of the Korani expedition, stood at the observation window, his dark, opalescent eyes scanning the blue planet below. It was a beautiful world, filled with life and organic complexity, but it was not beauty that had brought them here. Prepare to descend, Rosen ordered in a voice rich with authority yet touched with a rare tone of curiosity. The ship hummed to life, its powerful engines gently guiding it toward the surface. As it descended, Rosen reflected on the mission that had brought them to this backwater planet on the far edge of the galaxy. The Korani had studied countless species across the cosmos, mapping biological evolution, understanding the intricacies of life, and dissecting the mysteries of consciousness. And yet, there was something about humans that remained elusive. The Korani had heard whispers of idle belief in something called a soul. The idea was perplexing, unquantifiable, and impossible to dissect. No matter how advanced their technology, no matter how far their sciences stretched, the Korani could not find a material basis for this thing humans called a soul. It defied explanation, and for a species so committed to understanding the universe, this anomaly gnawed at their collective consciousness. Rosen was a scientist, and like his fellow Korani, he had no patience for superstition or metaphysical claims. But the concept of the human soul intrigued him nonetheless. The humans seemed to be the only species in the known universe to believe in such a phenomenon so universally and so deeply that it shaped their civilizations, their art, and their very sense of identity. As the ship landed, the Korani team materialized themselves in the midst of a bustling human city. New York, the humans called it. Their technology allowed them to move undetected, passing through the streets like ghosts, invisible to the naked eye, observing humans in their national habitat. Rosen watched the people rushing through their lives, busy and distracted, but somehow still connected to something beyond themselves. It was this connection, this intangible force, that Rosen had come to investigate. What are we looking for, exactly? Tilran, one of his colleagues, asked as they moved through the throng of people. We've scanned their brains, studied their biochemistry, and mapped their neural networks. There's nothing here that should suggest the existence of a soul. Rosen remained silent for a moment, considering the question. He had asked himself the same thing many times, and yet here they were. We are not looking for something we can measure, Tilran. We are looking for something we can understand. Tilran frowned, the ridges along his elongated skull creasing in confusion. How do we understand something that has no basis in the material world? That, Rosen replied, is the essence of the mystery. The team continued their exploration of the human world, watching them in their daily routines. They observed humans in moments of joy, in moments of grief, in moments of anger and confusion. There was something unique about the way humans responded to the world around them, something that transcended the mere mechanical reactions of neurons and synapses. They began to visit places of historical significance, tracing the arc of human civilization from its earliest days. They stood in the shadow of the pyramids of Egypt, ancient structures that had withstood the test of time, and marveled at how a civilization so primitive by Korani standards had managed to achieve such feats. And yet, it was not the architecture that fascinated Rosen. It was the beliefs that had driven the humans to build such monuments. They believed in an afterlife. Lina Ura, another archaeologist, noted as they studied the hieroglyphs carved into the stone. They believed their pharaohs would live forever, that their souls would ascend to the heavens. Belief, Tilran muttered under his breath. Belief without evidence, how is that possible? Rosen didn't answer. He didn't know. But the deeper they delved into human history, the more they found evidence of this persistent belief in something beyond the material world. From the philosophers of Greece to the mystics of the East, humans had always searched for meaning in their existence, and it was this search that seemed to give birth to the concept of the soul. the Korani team moved forward in time, visiting key moments in human history, watching as cultures rose and fell, as empires expanded and crumbled. They observed the Crusades, wars fought in the name of faith, and witnessed the Renaissance, a rebirth of human thought that fused science and spirituality in ways that the Korani could not fully comprehend. As they studied these events, Erosin began to form a hypothesis. Perhaps the soul was not something that could be measured because it was not a physical entity. Perhaps it was a byproduct of the human experience, of their constant striving to understand their place in the universe. It was a radical idea, one that flew in the face of everything the Korani knew, but the more they observed, the more sense it seemed to make. And then they witnessed something that changed everything. It was the winter of 1944, in the middle of the Second World War. The Korani stood on the edge of a battlefield, invisible to the human soldiers who fought and died around them. The air was thick with smoke and the stench of death, the sounds of gunfire and explosions filling the air. Amid the chaos, Erosin's attention was drawn to a group of soldiers huddled in a trench, their faces etched with fear and determination. One of the soldiers, a young man barely in his 20s, glanced at his comrades with a look of grim resolve. His name, they would later learn, was Private Thomas Miller. Erosin watched as Miller stood, his body tense with anticipation, and then, without hesitation, he rushed out of the trench, into the hail of gunfire. He ran toward an enemy machine gun nest, knowing full well that he would not survive. And yet, he did it anyway. Time seemed to slow as Erosin and his team watched Miller's final moments. The bullets struck him, one after another, tearing through his flesh, but still, he ran. And when he finally fell, it was with a smile on his lips, his eyes locked on the faces of his comrades, who now had the chance to escape because of his sacrifice. Erosin was stunned. He had seen death before, countless times, on countless worlds. But this was different. This was a broken bar meaningful. Miller's actions defied logic, defied reason, and yet they were filled with a sense of purpose that Erosin could not explain. The team stood in silence for a long time after Miller's death, the battlefield fading into the distance as the humans continued their war. It was Lina-Ure who finally broke the silence. He sacrificed himself, she said softly. For them. Erosin nodded. For something greater than himself. Tilran looked troubled. But why? What was the point? The point, Erosin said quietly, is that there was no point. Not in a rational sense. He did it because he believed it mattered. Matter to whom? Tilran asked. Erosin didn't have an answer. But in that moment, he realized that they were no longer searching for something they could explain through science. They were searching for something far more profound. They were searching for the meaning behind the soul, not its origin. The team continued their journey, moving forward in time to the present day. They visited human museums, libraries, and places of worship, trying to understand how this belief in the soul had persisted throughout the ages. They spoke to philosophers, scientists, and priests, each offering a different perspective on the nature of the soul. But it wasn't until they witnessed a human funeral that the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. The funeral was a simple affair, held in a small church in a quiet town. The Korani stood in the back, invisible as always, watching as the mourners gathered to pay their respects to the deceased. The humans wept, they prayed, they sang songs of remembrance. And as they did, Erosin saw something he hadn't seen before: an overwhelming sense of community. The humans weren't mourning the loss of a body. They were mourning the loss of something much greater, something that had touched each of their lives in a way that could not be quantified. They were mourning the loss of a soul. And in that moment, Erosin understood. The soul was not a thing. It was not an entity that could be measured or dissected. It was a connection, a thread that tied humans together, not just to each other, but to the universe itself. It was the result of their constant search for meaning, their ability to find purpose in even the darkest of circumstances. It was born from their capacity for love, for sacrifice, for hope. Erosin turned to his team, his voice soft but filled with conviction. The soul is not a product of evolution. It is not something that can be explained through science. It is a manifestation of the human spirit, their desire to find meaning in a world that often seems devoid of it. Tilran frowned. But what does that mean? What do we tell our people? Erosin smiled, a rare expression for a Korani. We tell them that humans are not just another species to be studied, they are something far more remarkable. They have found a way to transcend the material world, not through technology, but through their search for meaning. The team stood in silence, absorbing the weight of Erosin's words. They had come to Earth seeking answers, and they had found them, but not in the way they had expected. As they prepared to leave, Erosin cast one last glance at the planet below. The humans would never know they had been there, never know the impact they had made on the Korani. But in a way, that was fitting. The soul, after all, was not something that needed to be understood. It was something that simply was. The Korani left the funeral behind them, moving swiftly through time once again, scanning Earth's present. But something had shifted in Erosin's mind. A quiet understanding that simmered beneath his outward composure. Their mission to investigate the soul had transformed into something far more personal, far more intimate. For the first time, the alien archaeologist felt himself drawn not by scientific curiosity, but by something he couldn't fully explain. His thoughts lingered on Private Thomas Miller, on the funeral mourners, on the collective grief and joy the humans experienced so intensely. Every culture they had visited, every slice of history they had examined, pointed toward one undeniable truth: that the human soul was not a thing to be measured or quantified. It was a shared understanding, an emotional resonance that connected them to one another in ways the Korani had never anticipated. As they roamed the modern world, Erosin and his team made their way into the heart of human civilization: art galleries, theaters, and music halls, places where humanity's soul was most vibrantly on display. They watched painters pour their emotions onto canvas, their art seeming to capture moments of human experience that words could not. They observed actors on stage, losing themselves in the portrayal of love, fear, and loss, evoking visceral reactions from audiences who sat enraptured. In a dimly lit concert hall, the Korani stood invisible as a symphony orchestra performed a sweeping piece of music that left the human audience in silent awe. The sound, Erosin noted, seemed to rise and fall in waves, like an ocean of emotion flowing through the room. The faces of the humans reflected something deep and profound: a sense of being connected to one another, to something greater than themselves. The music carried them beyond their individual experiences, uniting them in a collective feeling of joy and sorrow, hope and despair. As the final notes faded, the humans sat for a long moment in stillness, as if unwilling to break the spell that had been cast. It was a moment that struck Erosin deeply. He had heard music before, in various forms across the galaxy. But this was different. This was not simply sound. This was an expression of the human soul, a language that transcended words and logic, one that stirred something even in the Korani archaeologist. "There's more here than we thought," Lina-Ura whispered, breaking the silence between the Korani. "It's not just about belief or sacrifice. It's about a broken bar feeling." They use art, music, storytelling to capture what words cannot. Erosin nodded. They express their souls through these creations. It is through their art that they understand themselves and each other. Tilran, ever the skeptic, frowned. "But what does that mean for us? We've seen the evidence of their emotions, their beliefs, but we still don't understand how the soul works, how it exists." "We're not meant to understand it," Erosin said, his voice quiet but firm. "Not in the way we're used to. We came here looking for something we could define, something we could explain with science. But the soul is not a thing that can be explained. It's an experience, and it's one that belongs to them." The team continued their exploration, now with a new understanding of their mission. They visited hospitals, watching as doctors and nurses fought to save lives, as families clung to hope in the face of illness and death. They saw parents cradle newborn babies, their faces filled with awe and wonder at the new life they had brought into the world. And they witnessed teachers guiding children, instilling in them the values and knowledge that would shape their futures. Everywhere they went, the Korani saw evidence of the human soul at work, not as a mystical force, but as a product of human connection, of relationships built on love, trust, and sacrifice. It was the thread that tied them together, binding them to one another and to the universe in a way the Korani had never before encountered. As they prepared to leave Earth, Erosin took one last moment to reflect on what they had learned. They had come to understand that the human soul was not an anomaly, not a glitch in the fabric of the universe. It was something far more significant, to something that set humanity apart from every other species the Korani had encountered. They had discovered that the soul was not just a belief or a concept. It was the manifestation of humanity's deep connection to the cosmos. A connection that could not be severed or explained by science alone. It was the result of their endless search for meaning, their ability to find purpose even in the face of suffering and loss. Erosin and his team stood on the bridge of their ship, watching as the planet Earth grew smaller and smaller in the viewport. The blue-green world that had once been just another point of interest on their galactic map had become something far more important. It had become a symbol, a reminder that there were things in the universe that could not be measured or understood through science alone. "We've learned something here," Erosin said softly, more to himself than to his team. "Something we never expected." Tilran, standing beside him, frowned. "But what do we do with this knowledge? How do we present it to the High Council?" Erosin turned to him, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "We tell them the truth, that we came here searching for answers and found something far more valuable. We found a species that has discovered a way to transcend the material world, and not through technology, but through their capacity for love, sacrifice, and meaning." Tilran looked uncertain. "And you think the council will accept that?" "They'll have to," Erosin replied, "because it's the truth." As the ship entered hyperspace, leaving Earth behind, Erosin allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. He thought of all the humans they had observed, of the countless lives they had touched without ever being seen. He thought of Thomas Miller, of the mourners at the funeral, of the musicians and artists who poured their souls into their work. And he thought of the families, the parents, the children, all connected by something deeper than science could explain. For the first time in his long career, Erosin felt something stir within him, a sense of awe, of wonder. He had spent his life searching for answers, but now he realized that not all answers could be found in the material world. Some answers, like the human soul, could only be found through experience. As the stars blurred into streaks of light outside the viewport, Erosin smiled to himself. The Korani had come to Earth searching for an explanation, but they had left with something far greater, an understanding of what it meant to have a soul.